Okay. Evening, everyone. Okay, hello, everyone. Welcome to the third quarterly meeting of the Global Action Hub on Waste, Methane, and Environmental Justice. My name is Sonia Studillo, GAIA Global Climate Communications Officer. We are recording this meeting for documentation and to allow people who can't join at the last minute to get access to this call. Before we get started, let's go over some housekeeping rules. Next slide, please. This webinar is available in 3 languages, English, Spanish, and Portuguese. Click the language button at the bottom of your Zoom. To get to know you, please change your display name to your name, organization, and your country. We have several panel speakers today. Please use the chat to send your questions anytime during their presentation. If time allow, we can allow some of you to ask your questions directly. And we have technical support available named as GAIA Tech Support. Please reach out to them directly via direct message if you're having technical issues. But most important, stay present, engage, contribute, assuming the best intention in everyone. Now, I'd like to turn you over to Froilan Grate, Regional Coordinator for GAIA Asia Pacific, who will be moderating this session. Froilan.
Thank you, Sonia. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our third quarterly meeting and the first one for the year 2025. For those who are joining for the first time, I just want to very briefly introduce GAIA as the facilitator of this space. GAIA is the largest global alliance of civil society organizations focusing on waste, climate, and environmental justice, working with national and regional alliances representing more than 1,000 organizations from 92 countries. Many members are deeply engaged in promoting and implementing zero waste solutions as climate champions. And in the last years, we have seen great momentum building in the intersection between waste and climate, especially since the launch of the Global Methane Pledge, which was announced at COP26 in 2021. Since 2021, we've seen very exciting and promising political and financial interest in tackling methane emissions from the waste sector. And yet, we've also been very clear that interventions in the waste sector must be aligned with environmental justice principles to ensure that we deliver emission reductions as well as social and economical benefits for all stakeholders involved, making sure that no one is left behind. So what is this space about? This is exactly why we felt the need to have an open space to discuss waste methane and environmental justice. This is one of our strategic priorities, organizing and advocating for waste methane reduction with environmental justice. The Global Action Hub is an online space to collectively assess, address, and celebrate the advancements of waste methane with environmental justice and support the implementation of the Global Methane Pledge in alignment with EJ principles. An open space to support all those working to this agenda and share expertise, strategies, celebrate, and ultimately hold on accountability space for environmental justice in the intersection between waste and climate. Our agenda today will focus on 2 topics. First, we'll look at one of the most important developments of the year, the revision of the NDCs or NDCs. Second, as you know, countries committed to the Paris Agreement are mandated to update their national climate plans, and these are due by COP30. This is a critical opportunity for national governments to prioritize climate action in the waste sector, and specifically to reduce methane emissions. Civil society plays a critical role in providing information and making sure national governments understand these opportunities. In particular, Local groups involved in implementation of solutions to reduce methane are in a privileged position to provide expert input to governments. Today, we will hear from our GAIA members who are engaged in these processes and will know about the opportunities and the challenges that they are facing. Second, we want to continue digging on the key topic of climate finance, which needs to move forward in parallel to the NDCs. More ambition needs to be matched with more climate finance, especially for the global south that is owed a fundamental climate debt. The most vulnerable communities in the world contributed the least to climate change and are facing critical gaps in climate finance to be able to develop sustainably. Moreover, we know that in the waste sector, most of the climate finance goes to WT incineration instead of zero waste solutions. So there is so much needed shift in climate finance policies. To dive deep into this topic, today we will do a participatory discussion in breakout groups where we want to hear your views on how we can collectively address this problem. To cover these topics, I am very honored to introduce our panel of experts. Thank you very much to all of you for being here today and for sharing what you know about these topics. Joining us, we have Mariel Vilella, who is the Global Climate Program Director in GAIA, who is based in the UK. We also have Yasna Tapia, who is the Project Coordinator at Alianza Basura, Cero in Chile. We also have Dorothy Otieno, who is a Program Officer, Center for Environmental Justice and Development from Kenya, and Eskedar Grate, Founder and Executive Director of Eco Justice from Ethiopia. Next, we have Bella Nathania, who is the Deputy Director from the Center of Environmental Law from Indonesia, and Shahriar Hossain, who is the founder of Environment and Social Development Organization from Bangladesh. Finally, to talk about climate finance for zero waste and lead the discussion we will have on the breakout groups, we have Yobel, who is GAIA's Global Climate Policy Officer. Without further ado, I want to give the floor to our panel of speakers who would look at NDCs 3.0. And to start with, we will have Mariel Vilella, who will give us an overview of the NDCs revision and why they are important for the methane reduction and EJ agenda. Reminders again, if you have any questions, please feel free to write them up in the chat box, and we will collect them and respond to all of those questions at the latter part of the program. Mariel, you have the mic.
Hello, good afternoon, good morning, good evening to everyone. Do you hear me well?
Yes.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining us here today. It's always exciting to join the Global Action Hub and to have so many people interested in this important, relevant, critical intersection of waste and climate. Today we're talking about NDCs, which are arguably one of the most important policy developments in the climate arena in this year. And before having the distinguished panel of speakers of the CSOs of many countries around the world, I just want to give a brief introduction, a brief overview to make sure that we are all on the same page. So I'm sure that many of you know this, but just to make sure that we are all on the same page and that we can understand why NDCs are so important for us, I want to just explain that NDCs, and this is next slide, please. NDCs are the national climate plans at the heart of the Paris Agreement, whereby all the countries that are signatories to the Paris Agreement, that are the parties, are mandated to update their climate plans every 5 years, increasing its climate ambition. The deadline for this submission was last February, and we have already seen several NDCs being submitted, but we can expect more coming in the run-up to COP30, which is going to be the final deadline. And one of the most important aspects of the NDCs is that it signals the national priorities for climate finance investment. And in fact, some NDCs will explicitly mention that they will be implemented in condition of having adequate financing. And so in this sense, having the right priorities in an NDC is very important to drive resources towards the right climate solutions. And of course, I must say that in GAIA, and this is a view that is shared across the climate justice movement, we see NDCs not only as an opportunity to raise the national target for greenhouse gas emission reduction, but NDCs are really an opportunity to set a pathway for a more comprehensive transformation in alignment with social and economic justice. If we only think mitigation in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, we will miss important interconnections and opportunities to improve the well-being of people. So next slide, please. So just to be very explicit about this connection between NDCs and climate finance. On the one hand, we have the NDCs, which include the priorities that national governments have identified, the priorities to advance climate mitigation, the type of support that is needed, etc. On the other half, we have the donor countries that are committed as well to deliver on the climate finance objectives, and they have the support of the international financial institutions that very often provide investment, act as well, providing expertise, guidance, etc. And so the question is, where does this land in the waste sector? What have we seen so far? So the last time that these NDCs were updated, this is in 2021, GAIA undertook a scrutiny of 99 NDCs and produced this scorecard, looking at all the NDCs and monitoring whether they had included the waste sector, what kinds of interventions they prioritized. And unfortunately, in 2021, our assessment concluded that governments, many of them, had missed an opportunity to utilize fully the mitigation and adaptation potential in the waste sector. And here you have some of the findings of the report at the time. More than a quarter didn't even include the waste sector, and there was 35 and 11 countries that introduced source separation of organics as a key measure for methane reduction and plastic pollution restrictions, which was very good, but still 39 of them included incineration technologies and production of RDF, which is refuse-derived fuel. Now, let's go one step further, looking at specific examples. For example, let me just point out at the case of the Maldives, which the NDC that they presented in 2020, for example, included a very positive phase out of single-use plastic, and yet included as well provisions for up to 8 incinerators with the support of several development banks. So, hoping that in 2025 we see more positive NDCs, it's important also to take into account another specific development that came out of COP29 in Azerbaijan, which is the declaration, the Raw Declaration, in which 35 countries that are representing 50% of the methane emissions worldwide signed this declaration with a pledge to reduce the methane emissions from organic waste. So this declaration, the Raw Declaration, was a very positive step forward. Now it has more than 50 countries that have signed it. It's still open for more signatories, and basically it gives us an orientation about the countries that may be putting more effort this time in including climate solutions in the waste sector in their NDCs. So in order to support these governments, GAIA, also at COP29, will launch this NDC checklist, which gives this specific guidance on how to make sure that these methane emission reductions are aligned with environmental justice principles. And these environmental justice principles is a document that we have produced collectively a couple of years ago. So this GAIA NDC checklist is this resource that we have here available for everyone. Please download it, have a look. It's meant to be very easy and accessible, and hopefully very useful for policymakers. And if you have any questions, do reach out to us. This is the policymaker guidelines that come out of these environmental justice principles, which again, I'm going to refresh very quickly. These principles advocate for upstream solutions at the top of the waste hierarchy. The principles put people and jobs first. So prioritizing the inclusion of waste pickers and waste workers is key, as well as enhancing the inclusion of local organizations and local expertise. Also, as well, very important, keeping polluters accountable and supporting holistic solutions. So let's just do now this exercise. Time travel to COP30. And let's imagine that we are looking at the NDC in your country. Let's imagine, what does it say? Does the NDC create more jobs for waste workers and waste pickers? Does it include composting, biogas, the kind of upstream solutions that we want to see prioritized for reducing waste methane? Does it include measures for food loss and food waste? Does it enhance more participation? Or does it reduce incineration even? So we in GAIA, we will be monitoring this space. We will be looking at the NDCs as they come out, and we will be publishing our assessment. And we want to encourage everyone to take this opportunity to influence the NDCs and to engage in this process. Because as we move forward to COP30, our next step will be to be supporting organizations in this process. And here there's some questions for civil society organizations that may want to engage in this process. Every country does the NDC process in a different way. So there is no one way of knowing what's going on. It really takes local organizations to find out what the process looks like in your country. So it's important to find out what the ministry is taking the task of updating the NDC. It's not always the same. It's not always the same department even within the ministry that will take on this task. Are the documents available? Is there an open consultation? In some countries, as we will see later in the presentations today, in some countries there's a public consultation. It's very easy to just give the input. In some other countries, it's very obscure, and we don't know how we can participate. So it's something that we really need to find out. Also, it's important to take into consideration that it really helps to engage with other civil society organizations. We often see, for example, in the case of Brazil, and we had GAIA member Polis here in our Global Action Hub some months ago, explaining how in Brazil, there were several civil society organizations that worked in a coalition to give input to the NDC, for example. Also, of course, important to know if there are other national legislation processes that may be relevant or anything else that we need to bear in mind. So just as a summary, we invite you all to use the GAIA NDC checklist to strengthen our advocacy, and we remain at your disposal to advance moving forward in the waste methane reduction with environmental justice agenda. Thank you very much, and I look forward to any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much, Mariel, for giving us this comprehensive overview to ensure that we are all aligned. And also, it was very exciting to see all of this opportunity. So thank you for sharing again. Now, let's get on with the country-specific presentations. Again, thank you all for the questions that are on the chat. For quick questions, we'll answer them directly on the chat, but we're also gathering all questions that we will try to answer in the latter part of the program. So to move on to the country-specific presentations that will illustrate the valuable role that CSOs are playing in the revision of NDCs, our next speaker is Yasna Tapia. Again, she's a program coordinator at the Alianza Basura Cero, Chile, and also affiliated with Fundación Basura and Ecoretorna, also in Chile. She is a civil engineer in biotechnology. Yasna, we're excited to hear your presentation. The microphone is yours.
Hi, good morning, good evening to everyone. Mi presentación va a ser en español. Agradecer a GAIA por esta invitación. Muchas gracias, Froilan, por la presentación. Bueno, yo pertenezco a la Alianza Basura Cero, que es una instancia en la cual me encuentro aquí representando y poder comentar el trabajo que como alianza hemos hecho tanto desde la implementación de las estrategias Basura Cero, así como también en el seguimiento de las NDC, que actualmente en nuestro país, ¿cierto?, también se encuentra en un proceso de consulta. Next slide, por favor. Gracias. Bueno, Basura Cero, la Alianza Basura Cero es una red de organizaciones y personas naturales que estamos comprometidas con el manejo sustentable de los residuos, la protección de nuestros bienes comunes o mal llamados recursos y la promoción de la justicia ambiental. En ese sentido, nosotros hemos tenido un trabajo por aproximadamente 10 años. El año pasado estuvimos de aniversario. Cumplimos 10 años de trabajo en red, donde hemos realizado desde seminarios, encuentros internacionales, también incidencia en políticas públicas, hemos realizado campañas de visibilización y concientización, hemos trabajado también con gobiernos locales, entre muchas otras también acciones que hemos realizado en el trabajo de poder difundir lo que son las estrategias Basura Cero. En la actualidad somos 18 organizaciones adheridas que trabajan distintas materias relacionadas a la gestión de residuos y durante este tiempo hemos publicado 9 documentos, entre ellos los que lanzamos este año, referente a la hoja de ruta, por ejemplo, Basura Cero 2.0, que es un instrumento guía para la implementación de la estrategia de Basura Cero en los gobiernos locales, particularmente en las municipalidades, considerando instancias de participación ciudadana, así como también distintas etapas de decisión a la interna de la estructura municipal, que muchas veces hay complejidades al momento de poder implementar este tipo de políticas a nivel de gobiernos locales o municipales. Se pasa también por planes y programas, así como también la votación de las distintas instancias del Consejo Municipal. Asimismo, este año publicamos el informe de comercio transfronterizo, reciclaje también de las baterías de litio y el estudio de caso respecto de las distintas experiencias exitosas en la prevención del desperdicio alimentario y residuos orgánicos, particularmente experiencias en ferias libres. Actualmente, como alianza, nos encontramos trabajando en distintas áreas. Algunas de estas nuevas, como por ejemplo el reciclaje electrónico o también organizaciones que están dedicadas a la reparación, han abierto una arista relacionada a la reparación. También tenemos muchas organizaciones referentes al fast fashion y cómo desde ahí también podemos generar política que sea política pública eventualmente. También la investigación respecto del comercio transfronterizo de plásticos y desechos textiles, así como el seguimiento sobre todo de las discusiones, de las negociaciones también del Tratado de Plástico a nivel internacional. Y también hemos hecho un seguimiento de proyectos de ley, por ejemplo, respecto del desvío de los residuos orgánicos a los rellenos sanitarios. Next slide, por favor. Muchas gracias. Bueno, en ese sentido, nosotros desde la Alianza Basura Cero hemos problematizado la importancia de poder colocar en el centro la gestión de residuos orgánicos. Chile enfrenta serios desafíos ambientales respecto de la gestión de residuos, pero también en distintas áreas. Por un lado, hay afectación de su ecosistema y a la calidad de vida de las comunidades. También tenemos problemas, por ejemplo, de deforestación, de erosión, pérdida de biodiversidad, de escasez hídrica, agravada, por un lado, por la sobreexplotación, por los derechos de aprovechamiento de agua, que es la calidad en que se entregan a perpetuidad los derechos de las aguas. Así también nos ha afectado la sequía e inclusive tenemos zonas mal denominadas zonas de sacrificio por altos niveles de contaminación. En total, los conflictos socioambientales que enfrenta Chile son más de 130 casos documentados. Y en ello, la gestión de residuos también es una problemática muy importante que como país poco a poco hemos ido implementando políticas, ¿cierto? Desde el nivel central, desde el gobierno, políticas que permitan abordar la problemática de la gestión de residuos. En Chile hay una creciente gestión de residuos sólidos, en donde hay una generación de 18 millones de toneladas en 2020, de las cuales 8 millones corresponden a residuos municipales o de las circunscripciones locales. Además, no hay infraestructura adecuada para el reciclaje y el país depende en gran medida de vertederos muchos de estos ilegales, y rellenos sanitarios, en donde se valoriza solo el 0,9% de los residuos, o sea, una muy baja cantidad. Uno de los principales problemas es la fracción orgánica de los residuos municipales, que representan entre el 48 a 56, y también en unos casos 58% del total, o sea, es una gran cantidad. Según estimaciones recientes, además existen iniciativas para fomentar la valorización, como proyectos de compostaje, y también el porcentaje reciclado, aún así, sigue siendo menor al 1%. Esta situación tiene impactos ambientales significativos, incluyendo la emisión del gas metano y la contribución del 4% de las emisiones de gases de efecto invernadero total en el país. A esto, como mencionaba, hay una falta de infraestructura, de financiamiento y de políticas efectivas que agravan la crisis, evidenciando además una necesidad urgente de mejorar la gestión de residuos en Chile. Todos estos factores reflejan esta urgencia en las políticas públicas integrales que garanticen esta protección del medio ambiente, pero también el bienestar de las comunidades, puesto que muchas veces nos topamos con soluciones que tienen que ver con una falsa solución, como es el caso de la incineración. Actualmente nos encontramos también en situaciones muy complejas de la instalación de un proyecto de incineración en la zona de la Araucanía, bueno, que más adelante voy a detallar ahí un poquito el problema que está ocurriendo en esa instancia, pero hay estas falsas soluciones, ¿cierto?, en las cuales nosotros como Alianza no creemos que es una forma de resolver la gestión de residuos, sino que más bien aplicar las estrategias basura cero. Next slide, por favor. Gracias. Actualmente nos encontramos en este proceso de actualización de las NDCs que recoge esto, tanto los distintos conflictos ambientales que existen, como los distintos, por ejemplo, criterios de vulnerabilidad, en los cuales nosotros nos encontramos. De los 9 criterios, tenemos 7 criterios de vulnerabilidad climático, y por tanto la NDC recoge eso y también recoge con medidas, si bien encontramos nosotros acotadas, recoge la necesidad de la disminución, ¿cierto?, del gas metano y de abordar la gestión de los residuos orgánicos. Actualmente nos encontramos en este proceso de actualización que se presentó en 2020, se fijó además en 2020 se fijó una meta de la carbono neutralidad hacia el 2050 y una reducción de las emisiones del 95 megatoneladas de CO2 equivalente para el 2030. Sin embargo, observamos que estos objetivos son insuficientes frente a la aceleración de la crisis climática, agravado además por otras crisis asociadas particularmente a las distintas áreas, ¿cierto?, de biodiversidad o de los distintos ecosistemas que tenemos en el país. Por eso, bueno, y actualmente nos encontramos en este proceso de actualización que está liderado por el Ministerio de Medio Ambiente, donde se desarrolla en 5 etapas. Primero se comenzó con esta publicación de una resolución que permite la participación ciudadana y de un borrador, ¿cierto?, de actualización, y la presentación de este anteproyecto, que además se elaboró con entidades técnicas para abordar estos distintos elementos. Actualmente nos encontramos en este proceso de consulta que finaliza el 11 de abril, en donde a través de una plataforma del Ministerio de Medio Ambiente, las distintas personas, organizaciones de la sociedad civil pueden subir sus indicaciones a este borrador que es público. De esta manera después se recogen estas observaciones. Algunas veces los procesos no recogen en completitud, ¿cierto? A veces, pues, si hay una buena participación ciudadana, una buena difusión en redes, una buena difusión también en los gobiernos locales, pueden llegar muchas observaciones y en algunos procesos de participación anteriores a veces no incluyen todas estas observaciones. Luego de esto pasa al Congreso y a organismos especializados para recoger estas observaciones y se ajusta al proyecto final incorporando estas sugerencias recibidas. Finalmente, la última etapa, que es la etapa 4, el Consejo de Ministros aprueba la NDC actualizada y se emite un decreto supremo para oficializar esta actualización. Bueno, nosotros revisando también esto, vemos que necesitamos compromisos más estrictos, protecciones de ecosistemas estratégicos, acciones climáticas con enfoque de justicia ambiental y medidas contra la contaminación y la sobreexplotación. Next slide, por favor. ¿Se puede dar la siguiente diapositiva? Gracias. Uno de los principales compromisos que toma Chile este año es potenciar la valorización de los residuos orgánicos en el país, llegando hasta un 30% en 2030, mediante la aprobación de un proyecto de ley que actualmente se encuentra en trámite. Asimismo, incluyen un segundo compromiso relacionado a reducir la cantidad de residuos generados por pérdida y desperdicio de alimentos. Siguiente diapositiva, por favor. Voy a tratar de ajustar un poquito por los tiempos. Gracias. Estos compromisos vienen a fortalecer lo que ya existe en Chile, que actualmente es la ley REP, que es la ley de responsabilidad extendida al productor, también la ley de plásticos y plásticos de un solo uso para restringir los plásticos de un solo uso, así como también la ley 21.100 relacionados a el no uso de las bolsas plásticas y la Estrategia Nacional de Residuos Orgánicos, que es la ENRO. Y ahí el proyecto de ley de organismos que actualmente se encuentra en el Congreso viene a fortalecer sobre todo esta última arista que tiene que ver con la gestión de residuos orgánicos. Siguiente diapositiva, por favor. Siguiente diapositiva, gracias. Entonces, el proyecto de ley de orgánico busca reducir la eliminación de estos residuos orgánicos mediante la promoción de la valorización y la optimización a nivel local. Se enfoca en evitar el desperdicio alimentario, en separación de origen, en recolección selectiva, además del desarrollo de infraestructura de valorización y fortalecimiento de la gobernanza. Actualmente nos encontramos en esta crisis de residuos sólidos donde el 58% de los residuos municipales son orgánicos y menos del 1% se valoriza actualmente. Esta propuesta señala que la implementación debe ser gradual a lo largo de 14 años y se dividirá en 5 fases según los tipos de residuo y capacidad de cada comuna. Se establecen obligaciones además específicas para municipios y generadores y gestores de residuos, así como la creación de planes estratégicos regionales y locales. Y esto es fundamental, porque la mayoría de las políticas públicas a veces son a nivel nacional, o la mayoría siempre son a nivel nacional, pero evitan o no incluyen mecanismos de participación a gobiernos locales y regionales mediante la generación de planes estratégicos y obligaciones también asociadas a la propia gestión de residuos a ese nivel. El proyecto de ley se inició su trámite en agosto del 2023 y actualmente se encuentra, pasó ya la discusión en la Comisión de Medio Ambiente y Recursos Naturales y actualmente se espera que inicie en la Comisión de Hacienda para seguir su paso así o seguir su paso en aprobación en las siguientes etapas dentro del Congreso. Nosotros como Alianza Basura Cero, en particular la Comisión de Orgánico, la cual integro y estoy en la coordinación, mediante el seguimiento de esta ley y hemos realizado, por un lado, un informe que contrasta tanto el proceso legislativo chileno como el internacional, así como también el resultado de una consulta pública que hicimos a más de 50 municipios y consultas en las organizaciones de la sociedad civil. Este informe nos parece una experiencia muy enriquecedora que demás países de la región y otros países puedan tomar para observar cómo fue el proceso de elaboración de la ley, pero también cómo los gobiernos locales han participado, cómo reciben este proceso de elaboración de un proyecto de ley que va a sentar las bases de la gestión de los residuos orgánicos a nivel nacional. Y que consideramos que hay algunos elementos que pudiesen ser mejorados en procesos que otros países puedan llevar a cabo. Siguiente diapositiva, por favor. Parte de estas críticas que nosotros hacemos tiene que ver con la ineficiencia, por ejemplo, en lo que son un fondo, por ejemplo, la existencia de un fondo que permita costear los valores o sea, los costos asociados a la implementación de sistemas de recolección diferenciada de los orgánicos. Asimismo, vemos que hay una falta de infraestructura asociada desde plantas de valorización, digestores anaeróbicos, plantas que incluyen estas tecnologías. También hay una falta a nivel nacional. Por otro lado, no incluye la participación efectiva de los recicladores base en estos procesos. Solo se les considera en la gestión de lo que son los envases y embalaje y no así en la gestión de orgánicos, cuando vemos que de facto en los territorios ellos también están involucrados en estos procesos. Asimismo, también vemos inequidades territoriales en donde no se consideran las diferencias socioeconómicas de los distintos gobiernos locales o municipios. Siguiente diapositiva, por favor. Gracias. Al respecto, entonces, nosotros identificamos ciertos puntos a observar. Por un lado, vemos la necesidad de que exista un marco legislativo general, una ley marco relacionada a la gestión de orgánicos que articule todas estas políticas, desde la Estrategia Nacional de Orgánico, el proyecto de ley de orgánico, también estrategia relacionada a la reducción de pérdida y desperdicio de alimentos, así como también sobre envase de embalaje y reducción de plástico. Asimismo, necesitamos una fuente de financiamiento a nivel nacional que permita soportar a los municipios la implementación de estas políticas. También creemos que es importante al momento de observar y elaborar este tipo de proyectos de ley, que finalmente es el compromiso de las NDC a nivel nacional, que se involucre a otros sectores, como por ejemplo agricultura, Ministerio de Obras Públicas relacionado de la inversión de la infraestructura pública, bienes nacionales, respecto también de aquellos áreas de uso público también que pueden estar destinadas a esta levantamiento de infraestructura, así como también principios que sean progresivos, metas progresivas, pero que involucren sobre todo la participación de las comunidades, de los territorios y de las organizaciones territoriales. Siguiente diapositiva, por favor. Y ya para finalizar, como Alianza Basura Cero, bueno, nosotros vamos a presentar este informe el 28 de marzo, referente a esta comparación que hemos hecho entre la legislación internacional, pero también todo el proceso de elaboración del proyecto de ley en Chile respecto de la gestión de orgánicos, así también el levantamiento de los estudios de caso de experiencias exitosas de gestión de orgánicos. Pero por otro lado, buscamos lograr incidencia en estas instancias de discusión a nivel congresal que puedan incluir elementos con enfoque y estrategia basura cero. Además, creemos que este proceso puede ser también ralentizado el de la aprobación de la ley, debido a que a final de año nosotros tenemos un proceso electoral de elecciones presidenciales y parlamentarias que pudiese estancar un poco también o peligrar inclusive la constitución de esta bancada basura cero que logramos el año pasado, en donde distintos parlamentarias se comprometieron a implementar estrategias basura cero dentro de su agenda legislativa. Vemos que el escenario electoral pudiese complicar este trabajo que nosotros estamos realizando. Asimismo, nos preocupa bastante que como organización hemos visto un peligro, dado que tenemos integrantes pertenecientes a la Alianza que han recibido amenazas e intentos de difamación en el territorio por defender, ¿cierto?, sus espacios territoriales de la implementación, por ejemplo, de plantas de incineración. Esto nosotros nos coloca como alianza en una posición de respaldo y también resguardo de nuestros integrantes, ya que a pesar de que Chile ha firmado el acuerdo de Escazú, aún no contamos con una legislación suficiente para asegurar el resguardo físico y psicológico de nuestros defensores ambientales. Y esto me parece igual importante mencionarlo, porque ahí donde se instalan los proyectos de incineración y donde se levanta la defensa de las organizaciones territoriales y comunitarias, ahí mismo también el empresariado y el sector privado busca amedrentar e intimidar, ¿cierto?, a quienes trabajamos en defensa de la naturaleza y de los ecosistemas y las comunidades. Por último, también otro desafío es el compromiso efectivo de los gobiernos locales, más allá de la voluntad de turno, para implementar tanto esta ley, pero también políticas similares e ir un poco más allá, porque vemos que falta esta voluntad ambiciosa o estar comprometidos en la implementación de las estrategias basura cero que son fundamentales ya para hacer esta transición hacia reducir la contaminación por gas metano, reducir también la contaminación asociada a la no gestión correcta de los residuos orgánicos, entre otros elementos. Siguiente diapositiva y con esto voy cerrando. Disculpen si me extendí un poco. Entonces, finalmente, bueno, también les invitamos a seguir el trabajo de la Alianza Basura Cero, que articula distintas organizaciones diversas en el ámbito de la gestión de residuos y que este año particularmente tenemos una agenda muy fuerte respecto de la gestión de los residuos orgánicos, tanto en las NDC y sus compromisos, pero sobre todo en el seguimiento de este proyecto de ley, y invitamos también además organizaciones y países, si aún no han levantado este proceso de redacción de un marco legislativo asociado a la gestión de residuos orgánicos, se contacten con nosotros para nosotros entregarle todo el conocimiento que ya hemos acumulado respecto de estos procesos que estamos viviendo a nivel nacional. Nuevamente, muchas gracias y atenta a cualquier consulta o duda.
Muchas gracias, Yasna. Es muy inspirador. Thank you for sharing all the work that's happening in Chile. Again, if you have questions for If not, please type them in the chat box. For all our speakers, please try to keep your presentations to 5 minutes to ensure that we get to all the amazing presentations tonight. Our next speaker is Dorothy Otieno, an environmental scientist specialized in environmental law, currently working as the program officer at CEJAD, the Center for Environmental Justice and Development, based in Nairobi in Kenya, where she leads the Plastics and Waste Management Program. Dorothy, we're excited to hear the work that's happening in Kenya. Please.
Thank you. All right. My name is, I've presented Dorothy Otieno, working with, in short, we are called CEJAD. And CEJAD is a public interest non-governmental organization in Kenya that was formed in 2012. And our mission is to promote sustainable chemicals and waste management. Next slide, please. Right. So in order to accomplish our mission, these are some of the programs that we have set ourselves to work in. One is the plastics and waste management. And under this program, we are looking at elimination of persistent organic pollutants. And this is in terms of open burning of waste. We want to eliminate open burning of waste and also eliminate persistent organic chemicals that are normally found in plastics or added in plastics. We're also advocating for zero waste systems, and we do this across multiple counties. And even importantly, we work with waste pickers. We have assisted waste pickers to formalize, and together with the waste pickers, we are implementing projects that do advocate for zero waste systems. We're also working on highly hazardous pesticides. The mission here is to phase out these pesticides because they are mostly used for suicides and also cause harm to farmers and also end consumers. And so the idea is to phase them out. We're also looking at addressing or eliminating heavy metals, for example, lead and mercury. Lead, especially in its use in paints and other areas, for example, spices. So we're trying to prevent the exposure of children to lead, especially in paint. And for mercury, we're looking at elimination of the use of mercury in dental amalgams and mining of gold, artisanal gold mining. And in Kenya, many areas still use mercury. And then also mercury cosmetics, the skin lightening creams that do contain mercury. So the idea is to phase them out, as well as phasing out mercury used in, for example, lamps and thermometers as they were used long time ago. And finally, the last program is on ozone and climate, and this is just to reduce the use of ozone depleting substances. All of this work addresses different conventions, the chemical conventions, also contributing to the Plastics Treaty, the Minamata Convention, and the Montreal Protocol. So our work that has been happening in Kenya to understand organic waste management, because we were dealing with waste management, but mostly focused before on plastics. And so last year we went deep into understanding organic waste management. And for us to do so, we conducted a legal gap analysis because we wanted to understand the national gaps and areas of opportunities in Kenya at the moment in addressing organic waste. And some of the opportunities that were coming up are, for example, the fact that our counties need to improve the data that they're collecting insofar as waste management is concerned. So there isn't really accurate data that is being collected so that we can say this is the much organic waste that's being collected or generated from a county or from a section of a community. Another opportunity was the need for county government to review the waste management policies and laws. And this was particularly important because we have a new law. It's called the Sustainable Waste Management Act in Kenya, but this has not been domesticated at the county levels. And so because waste management is a county function, then there's need for improvement from the county side in domesticating these laws. Another opportunity is on tax incentives, where waste pickers and actors could engage more in organic waste management if taxes towards that end are reduced. For example, we spoke with waste pickers and waste pickers said that, for example, a lot of licenses cost goes into managing different streams of waste, and it's difficult for them to do so for organic waste also. And so if this tax incentives can be provided, then waste pickers can participate in this mostly. And the second thing that we did, aside from the legal gap analysis, is we conducted a needs assessment because we wanted also to understand what is it that waste pickers feel they needed in order to successfully address organic waste. And also what is it that the county officials needed in order to improve the management of organic waste. So some of the things that we found out was that there's need to upscale waste segregation. So this is in the national laws, as mentioned before, but we're looking at counties domesticating this law so that it can be upscaled. Currently, we're working with about 60 households where we provided bins, and those households are segregating waste. And in that sense, waste pickers are able to get uncontaminated organic waste, but then this needs to be upscaled for waste pickers to be able to get, manure of high value and quantities for engaging in business. Waste pickers are also saying that they need to be supported to compost near markets where a lot of organic waste is being generated, so as to reduce the transportation cost of moving that organic waste to a landfill, which is about more than 16 kilometers at the moment to where the waste pickers work. Also, there's need to establish linkages with the Kenya Bureau of Standards so that the manure that they generate can be certified. And if community says that the manure that's being produced by waste pickers are certified, then it can increase their sales and their business. And lastly, that there's need for enterprise development along organic waste, including the use of black soldier fly farming, where this can be used as a source of protein for fish feed, but also generate income for waste pickers in the sense of selling this larvae, but also the manure. One other thing that I also need to mention is during our engagement with county levels, we have 47 counties in Kenya. So far, we've engaged 3 on zero waste, and we normally have discussions about organic waste. And the thing that's coming out is that counties need support in addressing organic waste because they say that all other waste streams, especially the recyclable ones, plastics, glass, all of that, boxes and paper, those are properly addressed, and there's a value chain that's already been established, but not organic waste, and that waste pickers should also go into this space. So there's a lot of awareness that is growing now about the need to address organic waste even within the counties. Next slide, please. Right. So this is what we have been doing as an organization since we came into this space, the NDC engagement. It first started this year because now we had all our reports on the need assessment and the legal assessment. We participated in the Nairobi Environmental Diplomacy Symposium, and this was a symposium that brought together negotiators of the Plastics Treaty, of the Paris Agreement, all of that, so that they could share with the community where the country is insofar as these negotiations are concerned. So from this discussion, especially on the Paris Agreement, we had that where Kenya was insofar as updating the NDC was concerned, and that they were purposed to submit by the end of February. So later on, with this information and engaged some of the people who participate, at least the officials who participate in the process, and we were linked together or to the focal point of the NDC partnerships in country. So the focal point of the NDC partnerships is one who assists Kenya to update the NDCs and also implement the action. So one of the key things, or 3 of the key things that we got to understand that was needed was that even though currently our, for example, zero waste projects really are doing amazing work. For example, we are providing waste bins, we're training households on how to separate, and we're doing all of that. But a lot is really needed to be able to provide the NDC, to feed into the NDC process. So for example, we needed data on, I think there's something that's going on with the presentation. But yes, we needed a lot of data, the end of the value data. For example, how much organic waste has actually been diverted from the dump site. So they need the quantities for that. How much organic waste has been managed through composting? That is the data that they need. And how much methane has been abated? Because when we approached her, we were telling her of all of this work that we've done on zero waste and training of the communities. And the next question was, have you had or collected any data of organic waste that you have transferred? And we were like, no, we are also experiencing challenges there with land and transport and things like that. And she said that for us to effectively model or use data from organic sector, then we have to provide this kind of data. And that was a very good learning opportunity from our discussion. Next slide, please. All right, so one of the other things that we also learned is that in the previous NDC for Kenya, the waste sector is mentioned as a critical sector. For example, we need to prioritize mitigation, or our mitigation efforts should focus on sustainable waste management. Another thing that, yes, another thing that was discussed is that out of all of the things that we're looking at, for example, the sectors, we're talking about transport, we're talking about agriculture. It seems like for Kenya, there's an appreciation that organic waste is a key contributor to methane, and therefore a lot has to be done in this sector to address methane gas emissions. But that data is needed to support Kenya to elaborate its commitments to address organic waste. So as I mentioned earlier, there's need for more data. For example, as I mentioned, how much organic waste has been composted, how much methane has been abated, and this will be very useful for Kenya to articulate itself and model its plans around how we're going to reduce methane gas emissions. Another lesson learned number 2 is that implementation of projects need to generate data. I think I've spoken about this a lot. We understand now that, for example, zero waste projects are capital intensive. We have to get land. Sometimes we have to depend on the county governments to provide us with land. Sometimes the land that they provide is far away, or the time it takes for us to get that piece of land can be challenging. And so sometimes we depend on the communities and the goodwill of the people who live next to the zero waste projects to support us, and that can come with financial incentives to pay for the use of this property. And so we see the need now that we cannot escape from that process, and we have to get that piece of land to compost, and we will use this data therefore to model for the NDC process. Next slide, please.
Dorothy, can we wrap up soon? Thank you.
Yes. Sorry?
If you can wrap up soon, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So my way forward, based on all of the things that we have learned so far, we've taken all of that information, and we are having the next meeting with the person who is in charge of the inventories, greenhouse gas inventories at the Ministry of Environment. And we want to take this opportunity to share with them the legal assessment findings, the need assessment findings, and the data from the zero waste projects, so that they can use this for their benefit to model for the current NDC before it is submitted. We also want to be engaging with this focal point to review. I know that the process has already been undertaken, and there's a lot of consultation that has already happened insofar as the NDC is concerned, and we want to look at that draft and to see whether organic waste has been mentioned and generally sustainable waste management. But how has organic waste and methane production from that sector been addressed? And even more importantly, looking broadly at companies or organizations that are dealing with organic waste, we want to assist them, sort of like form a coalition like the one we have on plastic. So we want to help other organizations to frame their goals better. Now that we know that that data at the end of the process is what's needed, we want to support organizations to be able to collect this data so that together we can, support that process of providing the relevant data. Next slide, please. We've been able to do so far. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dorothy. So exciting to hear this amazing work happening in Kenya. And I would like to highlight your work with waste pickers and looking at their role as climate champions. We still have a few more speakers to go. So again, my request for the remaining speakers to ensure that we have time for everyone. Please try to limit your presentations to 5 minutes. I feel bad about asking people to stop because these are all amazing sharing, but it's kind of late for some of you here, so we want to ensure that we end on time. So now from Kenya, we are moving to Ethiopia with our next speaker, Eskedar. He is the Executive Director of Eco Justice. Prior to his current role, Eskedar served as the Director of the Environment and Natural Resources Law Center at McGill University, where he also taught law. Eskedar is a licensed attorney at law and is committed to using his legal expertise to protect the environment and promote environmental justice in Ethiopia and beyond. We're excited to hear from you, Eskedar. Please, the mic is yours.
Thank you very much, Froilan. Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. So Eskedar here from Ethiopia has introduced. Eco-Justice Ethiopia, our organization, has been a proud member of GAIA since 2022, and we have been able to do amazing works, in collaboration with GAIA, and I'm happy to be meeting all of you today. So if we can get the slides started, if possible. Today, I'll just, we can go to the next slide, take you through Ethiopia's engagement in the NDC process. As it has been already introduced, from the very beginning, the NDC provides a very crucial framework within the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change for National Climate Action. So Ethiopia has also updated its NDC last in 2021, where it has set its priorities. And these priorities are very ambitious. And if we go to the next slide, you can see that Ethiopia has set a target of reducing emissions by 68.8% by 2030, with a net zero goal by 2050. And Ethiopia's priorities in the NDC are also further amplified in other specific policy instruments, whereby we see a very extensive plan for a climate resilient green economy to be built in this developing nation. But that being said, while having this excellent plan on the documents is important, we have also been seeing that implementation is a significant.
Eskedar, you're muted. Can you unmute?
Sorry, I don't know why that happened. Can you hear me now?
Yes, it's working now. Thank you.
Okay. So I was just saying that while having these policies, in the documents is important, implementation is a major challenge. And one of the areas, if we go to the next slide, one of the areas Eco-Justice Ethiopia is also actively working on is trying to make sure that the gap within the implementation is actually narrow as possible. Coming specifically to the recognition given to the role the waste sector can play in actually reducing emissions in Ethiopia, the NDC has mentioned, the Ethiopian NDC has mentioned that the waste sector would be one of the areas where we would reduce methane, and it has given recognition to diverting organic waste from landfills and incineration. But again, this plan has been more glorified in the documents than on the ground, because still our biggest municipalities are struggling in getting sufficient investment in more sustainable prioritized waste management systems, such as reducing and recycling. Unfortunately, Addis Ababa, the capital city of Ethiopia, I believe is the first city to have a waste to energy incinerator built a few years ago. And this waste to energy incinerator actually costed the city 120 million USD that it didn't have. So it was actually built on debt. And the incinerator currently is not generating the energy it was expected to generate, and is a source of many challenges and headaches for the electric power corporation which is running it. because it is actually costing more to run than the income it generates through the energy that it produces. And unfortunately, currently now, the power corporation, which is expected to own and operate it, is asking the municipality to take over administration of the incinerator, because it is not a profitable, or even they couldn't even break even their cost in terms of running the incinerator. But while this is happening, unfortunately, we still are also seeing requests from outside the country coming in to build additional incinerator plants for generating energy. And this is also one of the challenges I highlighted earlier, where we have a proper policy priority that gives recognition to giving priority to reducing and reusing and recycling, but we don't have sufficient investments actually going into this work. And this is also the challenge that is associated with climate finance, where climate finance, especially in our continent, comes in not necessarily in the shape and forms that we would like to see it, but in the shapes and forms that the financing entities would like to send it along. And this has been a significant challenge that we are also trying to highlight and trying to correct with our work in Ethiopia. If we can go to the next slide, we can see a bit more detail in terms of the work we have been trying to do with regards to the current updating process of the NDC in Ethiopia. Eco-Justice Ethiopia has a working relationship with the designated authority for climate issues in Ethiopia. That's the Ministry of the Ethiopian Ministry of Plan and Development. And together with the ministry, we had just last month a workshop that brought together all civil society organizations, almost all civil society organizations that are working on climate issues in Ethiopia, to discuss how we can contribute to the NDC updating process. But this is still a process that is in its very early stages. In addition to this, our organization has also been active in making sure that environmental justice is highlighted in the process of updating the NDCs and implementing the climate policies, because we have to make sure that the climate actions that Ethiopia takes are inclusive, that they recognize that climate change is impacting us in a very varied manner, even at the national stage. And coming specifically to the waste sector, we are trying our best to highlight the issues of informal waste pickers, who are at the forefront of leading the recycling and reuse initiatives, but they are given much less recognition. So we're trying to bring them into the forefront of the policymakers by the documentaries we do and the reports we publish and the various platforms we organize. We are also trying to make sure that the climate policies, are aimed at benefiting everyone, not just the bottom line or the GDP. And we also need to make sure in this process that people most affected are the people that are included in the solutions. Going to the next slide, which is going to be my final slide. We have to make sure that integrated waste management and environmental justice principles are recognized in the Ethiopia's nationally determined contribution updating process. And it's also important to bridge the implementation gap and direct climate finance toward the sustainable solutions. Of course, this is much easier said than done, because we especially from this end in the continent, do not control how the finance flows. And most of our policies are unfortunately also influenced by how the finance flows. So we have to make sure that we actually have an organic process that sets national priorities in a manner that would fit our context on the ground. and we need to deepen collaboration and collective action for a just and sustainable future. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Eskedar. It's really inspiring to see how you put environmental justice front and center in your work in Ethiopia and inspiring others in Africa and the world in the process. From Africa, we now would like to take a look at the situation in Asia. And joining us is Bella Nathania, Deputy Director for the Indonesian Center for Environmental Law. Apart from ISIL, Bella is also a guest lecturer at the Indonesia Intera School of Law. Bella, so happy to see you here and excited to hear about the work in Indonesia. You may start sharing now.
Thank you, Froilan. I will try to be brief. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, friends. Thank you, GAIA, for inviting me to share our experience to advocate for more ambitious emission reduction target from domestic solid waste subsector in Indonesia. Next, please. Next, please. So first of all, I would like to start my presentation with doing a brief introduction on ISIL. So ISIL, Indonesian Center for Environmental Law, founded in 1993 and serves as the first environmental law organization in Indonesia. We work to assist the government, but also work with the grassroots communities and also CSOs to ensure the realizations of human rights, democracy, and environmental rights. Our main partners are Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Forestry, Ministry of Home Affairs, Supreme Court, and also Attorney General Office. Next, please. So just to be brief, here is several of our milestones we involved in the making of a process of 14 environmental and natural resources regulations and policy in international, national, and subnational level, including regulations on plastic and also waste management. Next, please. So just to be brief, so Indonesia already submitted our very first NDC since 2015. We call it the intended NDC. And from this table, we can see an increased ambition from the government. Although I'm pretty surprised to see the commitment from other countries, for example, from Ethiopia, which way more ambitious compared to us. Next, please. Indonesia NDC, especially on waste sector, also see an increase in ambitions, as you can see in here. The main sources of the greenhouse gases emission from waste sector in Indonesia is contributed mainly by industrial wastewater treatment. So domestic solid waste sector placed on the second after industrial wastewater treatment. The contribution of the industrial wastewater treatment also doubled from domestic solid waste. Next, please. Although we still see a lot of opportunities to also reduce. Next, please. Next slide, please. Although we also see several opportunities to also develop a more ambitious target on the domestic solid waste reduction. So here is several opportunities that we see could be utilized. The first one, so the main priority of the new Minister of Environment during his 100 days is on waste governance, fortunately. So we try to assist the Ministry of Environment to enable a new policy to close open dumping activities in the landfill. On one of their statements, they realize a landfill contribute to the methane emissions. So we hope that through this policy, we could reduce the methane emissions from landfill. But we think it is not the optimum way to reduce methane emissions because they try to solve the problem from the end of pipe. Although one of the enabling policy that we suggest to the Minister of Environment during the development of this policy that we need to attach the policy on landfill closure and also ensure that there is a food waste reductions from the sources. Next one, aside from the focus of the government, we also see the opportunities on the development of the second NDC document in Indonesia. So the development of the second NDC document in Indonesia was already started since 2024, but with the new government came in the late 2024, the new government wanted to deliberate again on the NDC to ensure that it will be aligned with the new development plan and target. Next one, aside from the second NDC document, we also have another document that also supported the implementation of the NDC, especially on the waste sector. We call the document is Zero Waste and Zero Emission 2050 plan. It was established by the Ministry of Environment in 2024. Through this plan, the government created a roadmap to ensure reductions of greenhouse gas emission from waste sector. In 2050, they targeted that the contributions of domestic solid waste subsector would hold only 1 million tons of CO2 equivalent in 2050, which is decreased by almost 35 million ton of CO2 equivalent from 2020. Implementation, next one, we also have a regulation that we call, it's more like a Ministry of Environment regulation on the implementation of NDC. So this new regulation that was established in 2024 is created to ensure the implementation of the NDC throughout the different sectors. Several things that they check during the establishment of this roadmap is the mitigation action plan, adaptation action plan, and also financial availability to implement this project and also these actions. And the final one, which is not in the presentation, but I will also like to address, is the new legislation that we try to assist the parliament is on the climate justice bill. Through this climate justice bill, we think that it will become an influential bill that will connect both mitigation, adaptation effort from different sectors, and also ways, of course. And also we try to connect different stakeholders from it. So in this bill, we also try to put norm on mitigation and adaptation action in waste sectors to ensure the fulfillment of climate justice and also environmental justice. And finally, next please, my very last slide. So here is our recommendations for Indonesia second NDC. We on these recommendations, there are several recommendations, but I only put 4 of it in here. So the first one is that we recommend the leftover food that is still suitable for consumption be reused, and also food waste composting, and also considered that LFG recover is not included in the mitigation action, and also waste to energy or RDF is not considered to be included in the NDC or the second NDC. So when we delivered the recommendation directly to Minister of Environment and Member of Parliaments, the Minister of Environment gave us a feedback. So he said that it is important to still use the LFG recovery and waste to energy to achieve the intended outcome in the NDC. So he thinks that if we only rely on the organic waste reduction, it will be too ambitious for them. And also I want to address that one of the gap on this report is we haven't attached the adaptation aspect on waste sector. Finally, we also took a note that the process during the development of the second NDC is not fully open to the public. There are several hearings conducted by the government for limited CSOs. We are lucky that we have the connections and also a very strong relationship with the Ministry of Environment and also members of parliaments. But we realize that the future homework is we need to advocate to widen the public participation sphere in the future. Thank you. I'll give back to Froy.
Terima kasih banyak. Thank you so much, Bella. It is interesting to see how waste and climate work is being looked at from the lens of good governance, as ISIL is doing in Indonesia. So thank you so much for sharing the developments there. For your questions for Bella and for other speakers, again, please use the chat box, and we'll get to those questions at the end of our session today. From Indonesia, we'll now move to another Asian country, Bangladesh. And joining us is Dr. Shahriar Hossain, a social scientist and life science researcher, environmental journalist, and social justice advocate. He is the founder of Environment and Social Development Organization, or ESDO in Bangladesh, and leads ESDO's research team. He is a pioneer and key personality of the global anti-plastic movement and the main architect of the ban of polythene bags in Bangladesh. Dr. Shahriar, please, the mic is yours.
Thank you, Froy, and thank you, all participants. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. This is the current scenario of the Bangladesh. As you know, the Bangladesh is a small country with huge populations, and the methane emissions from the landfill is the serious issue for the Bangladesh right now. Next slide. Next slide. So Bangladesh has doing some initiatives already, and for the methane plays and global climate resilience initiatives. ESDO is have some findings. After the last year, we have conducted a research, the primary methane emission study, and that found that the methane is one of the serious and major emitters for the global warming, and it is linked to the climate change. So we are proposed the government to intervene in line with the mitigations, in line with the reduction and phase out waste to energy to prioritize methane recovery. And we are promoting for zero waste. And for your information that ESDO is a pioneer organization for many issues, and also the pioneer organization for zero waste mechanism in Bangladesh. And you'll be happy to know that ESDO has established the zero waste village in Bangladesh, which is the part of the national implementation process right now. And we are able to include the zero waste mechanism in the national waste management policies. But to come to the NDCs, next slide, please. And currently, government is doing for revision of revising the NDCs. And there is some priorities, but we are focusing on the environmental justice issue as the zero waste framework, which is in line with, we are working through GAIA, providing our expertise or knowledge to the government. And Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change is the leading organization in Bangladesh to work on that issues. And we hope that we will be able to include the zero waste mechanism. And it is still challenging that the waste to energy plant has already established in Dhaka landfill. But good things is that it is already proof that this waste to energy is kind of white elephant, and it is not workable for in our socioeconomic condition. So another good things is that we have currently the interim government, and our environment minister is proactive, and she's from the NGO background, so she's very attentive of this process, and we are trying to include the whole process to be reduce the methane emission from the landfill sources. And Dhaka is the major city, but we have 6 major cities in the countries that are creating huge emissions from the methane and source from the landfill. It is not just about to incorporate these issues to the policy level, it is to be incorporate the justice for particularly for the waste pickers. We are highlighting the waste picker rights and their well-beings, their occupational health safety issues in this process. And we are going to organize a national dialogue on 24th of this month for NDC revisions, and hopefully all the relevant government ministry participate, and the minister already confirmed our participation. So we are moving forward to work together with the government and for highlighting the upcoming COP30 so that the government can revise this NDC in a collective way. Next slide, please. Next slide. So in conclusion, that we are focusing to work together for environmental justice issues, for resilience, and protecting our land, protecting our human beings from the serious havoc from the methane emissions. And we would like to work together with all of the GAIA members around the world. And thank you all.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shahriar. It's amazing to see the work now in Bangladesh, building on your work that resulted in Bangladesh having the first national plastic bag ban in 2002, and now using the same strategies and engagement with the government to work on waste, methane, and climate. And many thanks again to all our speakers. There are no pending questions for now, but you can still send your questions on our chat. For now, let's move on to the second topic for today, climate finance for zero waste with Yobel Putra, GAIA's Global Climate Policy Officer. Yobel is an environmental engineer by training, and he started the zero waste journey after learning of the catastrophic landfill avalanche that killed 143 people, including waste pickers in Bandung in Indonesia. Prior to joining GAIA, Yobel worked as a policy advocacy staff at YPBB, a local NGO in Bandung that implemented zero waste solutions and co-coordinated the Alliance for Zero Waste Indonesia, which consists of 10 NGOs that advocate for zero waste. Yobel is going to share a presentation about finance and climate finance in the waste sector. Yobel, please, you may start your sharing.
Thank you, Froy, and thank you, everyone. There's a lot of information, precious experience, and I want to build on top of the MDC's presentation by our friends, which is finance. We know that MDCs is the cue for climate finance, but we want to first understand finance issues, the sticky problems with financing waste management in general. So I would like to start by sharing some context to land my upcoming presentation. First, that waste management is an essential public service. And second, its nature is cost-centered rather than profit-generating. And third, in most places, local governments, cities, are responsible for delivering waste management services. What we also know is that funding available for the waste sector is very limited. A lot of cities in the global south countries don't have enough budget to run even the basic services, and this is universal waste collection and source separation. On the other hand, the available public funds tend to be directed on downstream polluting facilities, usually in the form of tipping fee subsidies for dump sites or landfills, or feed-in tariff to buy electricity from waste-to-energy incinerator. And the current finance mostly focus on infrastructure building projects, such as material recovery facilities, composting plants, building new regional landfill, sometimes waste transfer station, dump trucks, among many others. However, operational costs, again, it's the biggest cost component. It can be as much as 80% of the overall project lifetime cycle. So yes, it is rarely being financed adequately. And third, that waste financing projects are heavily focused at downstream level, like landfill gas capture, building new sanitary landfills, incinerators, sometimes to pilot some landfill mining and producing RDF for burning, which is not the solution that we want. And private finances, on the other hand, they focus on generating profit, which is a nature of a private sector. However, as I shared earlier, waste management is cost-centered by nature. While some private financing may support zero-waste solutions, they often shoulder a huge investment risk because of the poor basic services like collection. And lastly, that the centralized waste management solution, which is zero waste, involves community groups, informal workers, waste picker cooperatives, now a lot of small-scale BSF farmers. They don't receive adequate financial support despite of their successes. This includes like food saving, food sharing projects, home and community composting, which rarely promise a market-based return of investment. But sometimes they do not regenerate profit at all because they deliver justice and co-benefits more than financial profits. Compared to big projects, individually, the solutions tend to be small in scale. However, we know that their potential lies in the power of decentralization, meaning they are small, but many, collectively powerful. Next slide, please. Now we're talking about the climate finance part. What are the specific barriers for grassroots groups accessing climate finance? As a context, there are growing opportunities around climate finance in the waste sector, particularly around methane. And one of them is the Lowering Organic Waste Methane Partnership, or LOWM, which some of you may have heard already from the previous Action Hub calls. So LOWM aims to mobilize $10 billion of investment to reduce waste methane, achieving global methane pledge, but also Paris Agreement. And in this context, development banks and private sector as financier have a significant role in driving climate finance for zero waste. And building on the previous NDC's presentation, we also know that NDCs are lacking financial signals for driving climate finance demand for zero waste. And access to climate finance is a huge issue for cities, local communities, waste picker groups, who are actually at the forefront of implementation. And these groups do not have access, like direct access to this pool of climate funds. Often it needs to be channeled through national government and national politics. Sometimes they do not have a say about what's the solution that they want for the cities and municipalities. Third, projects led by community informal groups are having hard time to access finance in general, and even climate finance. One part of it is because of poor data recording or collection, and they are operating relatively small in scale. And this makes it quite difficult to convince big financiers like development banks or climate financiers to invest in zero waste. And in the context of climate finance, these groups are often seen as unable to meeting financiers' expectation, especially development banks, about the scale or the amount of greenhouse gas mitigation potential from one project. So the fourth point is really about the DAP instruments. We know that DAP has been the main climate finance instrument, and grants, which is the call for climate reparation, remains very low. While zero waste solutions are great at saving costs, we all know that. It often doesn't promise a big return in investment, as I mentioned earlier. Some projects actually generate good revenue, like we've seen Black Soldier Flies farmers, and some like waste picker cooperative gaining revenues from providing services through a contract with cities or companies. However, they need a longer tenure or maybe a very low interest rate to pay back any loan if it's about loan. And in general, structuring finance for upstream solutions tend to be very challenging for financiers. And the last part is really about the indicators and criteria. We've seen the MDBs doesn't include co-benefits and adaptation potential, as we've seen in under the previous presentation. So this is a big gap, but we know that zero waste solutions generate the biggest co-benefits and also has a lot of adaptation potential. So next slide, this is my final slide. So GAIA is working on a report on climate finance for zero waste. This is where I want to invite everyone to participate and figure out like how can we shift climate finance towards zero waste solutions. There's two discussions, actually, two questions I have put here. What are the key obstacles that hinders climate finance to support zero waste? And the second part is, what are the solutions? What should we do to make sure that climate finance flow to the local level, community groups, farmers, waste pickers, so it's not stuck at the national level? Because we don't have time anymore, we are over time for breakout groups. So we are inviting everyone who wants to provide inputs to this question to send emails to Mariel and Yobel. We'll put that on the chat box. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yobel. It's been an amazing sharing from all our speakers. Definitely worth it for some of us to stay until midnight. As Yobel mentioned, unfortunately, we ran out of time for our breakout group, but we definitely want to hear from you. We are inviting everyone who wants to provide inputs to the questions that Yobel shared to please send your inputs via email to Mariel and Yobel. We'll send the questions and the emails on the chat. Again, thank you all for joining our third quarterly meeting for the Global Action Hub for Waste, Methane, and Environmental Justice. We look forward to having you all again next time. Good morning, good afternoon, and good night for all of those in Asia. Have a good rest of the day for the rest. Thank you again. See you next time.
Thank you.